Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about a concept that I think really doesn't get enough attention for developing players, and I think it's also one that they have a lot of difficulty internalizing, and that is commitment. So in chess, commitment refers to where you make a move and you are stuck with that move and its long-term consequences. So for instance, if I ask a kid why the move pawn to g4 to start out the game is not such a great move, a lot of times they'll tell me, well, it's because you're not controlling the center or something like that, which is true. But I think the bigger problem with it is that it's a move that white is going to be stuck with and doesn't really do that many useful things. The only way pawn to g4 will be useful is, say, if black were to castle kingside and you could launch like an attack on his king. But black hasn't decided that at all, and what g4 does means now it's very clear that white is committed to attacking on the king side, and that they probably also won't put their own king there. So, for instance, if black just makes a solid move like d5, he's already attacking this pawn, and it's just not clear what white has gotten from this, right? So, in general, the most committal moves tend to be the following three types of moves: pawn moves, piece trades, and castling. Those are the three types of moves that you really can't undo. If you develop a piece to a square, say you play something like, I don't know, like knight f3, that's a good move because it's a useful move, but it's also one you can change later. All right, so in order to really demonstrate this concept, I want to look at a game from the 14th world champion, Vladimir Kramnik. He's playing black in this game. And this was from the 2018 Candidates Tournament versus Logan Aronian, who is another player who's been, in the 2800s, strong player. So it starts out with the move pawn to e4, which is not something Aronian had really played very much, but obviously it's a good move. Black plays pawn to e5. We get knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the Spanish. And Kramnik plays the defense that really he was the one who popularized this, the Berlin defense, with knight f6, which, again, these are all just very, very principled moves from black. That's why I and so many stronger players like this defense a lot. Black is just putting a pawn in the center and developing quickly. And here white played the move pawn to d3 to defend his e4 pawn. All of this is fine so far. Black continues with his development, bishop to c5. And here white makes the first of a couple of commitments that are coming up. So first he plays bishop takes c6, which is a piece trade. Now that in itself is not like a terrible move, but it is, it is committal. White is giving up his bishop pair, and he is doubling black's pawn, so it's not totally useless, but he is making one commitment right there. So black recaptures. And now white plays the move white castles, which, as I mentioned, is another big commitment. Obviously, in chess, you're going to want to castle most of your game, so I can't, say, oh, it's a bad move, but it is announcing that the king is going to stay on this side of the board for a long, long time. Oh, just one thing really quick, because if you're newer at this, you might not know this trick, but after white took this knight, he can't actually steal the e5 pawn because of a tactic. Give you 3 seconds to find it. Yeah, black can play queen to d4 with a nasty fork on f2, threatening mate and hitting this loose knight. So it's just losing for white. It's a common motif in the Spanish. Okay, so yeah, white castled here. And Kramnik now I think really shows his class, because here he could have just played the natural move, and he does, but it's specifically a very, very flexible one. He plays queen to e7. Which now defends this e5 pawn, but just keeps his options open. He hasn't castled yet. He's just making good multi-purpose moves without really declaring too much of an intent yet. And now I think Aronian makes yet another commitment, and this is where I think he's really made one too many. He plays pawn to h3, which makes some sense. He's stopping, bishop to g4. Which, maybe that's annoying. I don't think it's too bad here. But the real problem with this is he is moving a pawn now near his king, which he's already, okay, so he's declared that his king is going to be on this side. he has also now pushed this pawn to h3, which gives black something called a hook, meaning that if you could imagine in some position, black, I know this seems a little bit far-fetched at the moment, but if black could play something like g5 and g4, it's going to attack this pawn and force, a line to open up somewhere. Maybe we'll rip open the g file, and then this king could come under a lot of pressure. So this is where Kramnik uncorked a really nasty surprise move. He played here rook to g8, which, given what I just showed you, now this makes a lot of sense. So I think Aronian probably figured that black would just castle or something natural like that without too much thought, but this is where Kramnik is really taking advantage of Aronian's abundance of commitments, right? So he plays rook to g8. White plays now king to h1, just getting off of the file because he senses danger is coming. Kramnik continues with knight to h5. He may not want to play g5 just yet because the knight and the bishop are attacking. So he plays knight to h5 so that the queen can also support g5. And also now this knight has eyes on more aggressive squares like f4 or maybe even one day g3. Here, Aronian played c3, which I think might just be the final fatal mistake. He's really needs to get pieces out now. I think something like knight c3 was called for. The position is going to start opening up soon, and he's just underdeveloped. And now Kramnik really punishes him after c3, and he just goes straight for it with g5. And white now plays knight takes e5, which is like a little tactic. He's threatening, he's opened up his queen to attack the loose knight on h5. And black is not looking to just take the knight and have his knight swapped off. He cares much more about continuing the attack, so he plays g4. Just, again, prioritizing, white has this king stuck here, and black has, developing now this knight, this rook, this queen, this bishop on c5 potentially, this bishop on c8, and this pawn on g4 are like 6 different attacking pieces. He's really prioritizing going after the king, more so than kind of petty materialism. White plays pawn to d4, attacking the bishop, so black retreats to d6. Still aimed, in the king's general direction. White plays pawn to g3 here, desperately just trying to close lines. Again, for the newer players, I don't think any strong player would really seriously consider a move like h takes g4 here, but just to kind of show how quickly this can unravel. Black's queen's now going to enter with queen h4 check. The king will have to move. Now black will probably remove this knight, which was defending g4, and just take this pawn, and this is just really hopeless. Black now has basically 4 attackers on a king that just is lacking defenders sorely. I mean, moves like, if white moves this queen, say something like queen c2, bishop f3, and it's all but lost already. Okay, so after bishop d6, Aronian tried g3 to keep things closed. Kramnik removed that knight because it was kind of an annoying defender. Takes, and now he takes this pawn. Aronian plays queen to d4, and question, here's a committal question, do you think you should trade queens here? Again, I think if you've had more experience, this is an easy question, but for the newer people in our audience, absolutely not. You do not want to trade queens. You are on the attack, and the other elements of the position are maybe questionable. You do have doubled pawns. It's you don't really have much here except for the attack, and trading, especially your good pieces when you have an attack, is definitely inadvisable. So Kramnik just keeps queens on the board. Aronian decides to try to shut down the king side, which makes a lot of sense because if it opens, his king is going to feel very unprotected. And here Kramnik now continues with c5, kicking white's queen. We get queen c4. Kramnik makes sure to keep his development going, bishop e6. Queen b5 check, which forks the king and the b7 pawn, but luckily there's the move pawn to c6. Now the queen defends that. Queen to a4. And now Kramnik here plays the move pawn to f5, which is really, again, just showing how good a feel he has for this position. Just to kind of explain what's going on, White's king is just barely, White's king side, I should say, is kind of just barely holding the fort down. This king is surviving now by the skin of his teeth. he's got a lot of pawns stuck on dark squares, and whenever your opponent has a lot of pawns on one color, it means the other color is necessarily weaker. So white is weaker on the light squares. And especially so because if you remember early on in the game, he traded off that light squared bishop. So again, these commitments are coming back to haunt white. So Kramnik now, in order to take advantage of the light squared weakness, plays f5, just ripping them open for this bishop over here. White plays bishop to g5, but just to kind of, again, show you what would happen if he were to take. If Aronian were to take this pawn, it's just over. Black's going to throw in a nasty intermediate move here. Knight takes g3 check. Point being, after white recaptures, now bishop d5 check is extremely strong because the second rank is very weak. So after white moves out of this queen just invades, and there's just too many threats. The mate on g2 is coming, and if white tries to block, we go check. And white has to block again, and now this pawn falls with checkmate. So that's not what white wants. So instead, white plays bishop g5, and attacking the queen. And again, I would ask you, again, especially if you're a newer viewer, what would you play? White has threatened your queen, has developed a piece with tempo, seems like a reasonable move. Again, I think any strong player now worth his salt is going to just do what Kramnik did, which is they're going to throw material considerations by the wayside and just keep the momentum going. Kramnik, I think, spent maybe 2 minutes on this move. I checked it recently, and just took this bishop, giving up the exchange, and then continuing on with his attack with the move pawn to f4. Just all systems go. He now has this bishop, the knight, the queen, and these two pawns, which when they're advanced enough count as attacking pieces. So he's got 5 pieces swarming this white king. White plays queen back to d1, desperately trying to get some defense over here. Just to show you, though, he just can't do something like taking this pawn. The knight would now invade on f4, which is an amazing attacking piece, and this queen would be headed queen to g5, queen to h4. King is not going to survive that. So again, white plays queen to d1. Kramnik continues by including every piece in the attack, so he brings his rook in with tempo. Queen to c1. Now he takes on g3, just trying to break down the walls of white's king side. Knight to a3. Aronian is desperate to develop pieces, and Kramnik just keeps his pieces heading straight for the white king with rook to d3. White tries to trade pieces, which makes sense if you're being attacked. If you can, as I mentioned before, if you can swap off pieces, that can sort of take the sting out of the attack. But again, Kramnik finds just an absolutely beautiful move here. And this time, I really, especially even if you're an advanced player, I would take a moment to pause this video and think what you would do here. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going, but please do pause your videos because this is a beautiful move. Kramnik is trying to rip open lines, again, at all costs. Material considerations are secondary, or maybe not even secondary. They're somewhere way down there. And he just plays bishop to d5. Beautiful move. Threatening now to play queen takes e4 and just form like a deadly battery on this diagonal. So white plays pawn to f3, trying to keep everything closed. Again, just to show you, if he were to take this bishop, we would have queen e4 check with eventually mate to follow. Check. Very nice move. Rook to g3, aimed at g2. And a nice little mate there. So after bishop d5, Aronian tries to shut it down with f3, but Kramnik just keeps going. G takes f3. Takes, and now the final sequence, queen to e2, threatening mate on g2. White plays rook to e1, pinning the queen to the king, but one final tactic. Again, pause your videos if you want more time, but this one's not particularly hard. g2 check, and here white resigned in view of the fact that, okay, he doesn't want to play king g1, because then black will just push this pawn with check. So if he plays king h2, black can now promote the pawn with a double check. King is forced to take, and now he can promote this with check, and last move for checkmate is rook to h3. So again, this is a beautiful game by Kramnik, really showing how to take advantage of your opponent's overcommitments. So this is Coach Logan. See you guys next time.